Print servers in federal environments create risk and unnecessary complexity. Every new printer, location, or policy adds strain to infrastructure that was never built for today's demands. FedRAMP High Authorized Printer Logic eliminates print servers with a secure cloud-native, zero-trust solution designed for federal IT. With advanced security, centralized control, and simplified management, agencies can modernize print without added burden. See what secure serverless printing looks like. Visit Vasion.com to learn more.
Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Wednesday, August 26th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, September could bring answers on several issues federal employees have been tracking for months. Plus, a court can tell an agency it was wrong, but getting employees the remedy they won can take much longer. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. The Transportation Security Administration is replacing its short-lived Gold Plus privatized screening concept. Instead, TSA's new leader wants to build on the agency's existing private screening program. Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday joins me now with more details. Justin, great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
It feels like just a few weeks ago we were talking about this new Gold Plus initiative. What's changed in TSA's strategy?
Yeah, it's interesting. TSA publicly unveiled Gold Plus in May. We had the first report on the program in April. It had kind of been in the works since late last year. But now new TSA Administrator David Cummins is moving to replace this program under what they're calling the Horizon 25 strategy. This is coming as TSA approaches its 25th anniversary. And the goal of this new strategy under David Cummins is to really improve how TSA operates across three distinct areas. It's modernizing TSA's checkpoints, elevating the traveler experience, and what they're calling hardening multimodal transportation security. So just making it more secure than it is today. And part of this whole strategy is now expanding and evolving the screening partnership program and having that replace Gold Plus. Now, the Screening Partnership Program, the SPP, has been in place for decades, since TSA's creation, essentially, as an alternative to using federal airport screeners. Airports can opt into SPP and contract with a private company that TSA approves of to actually use privatized screeners, private company screeners, operating TSA equipment. And so Cummins, under this big new strategy, wants to build upon SPP. He also wants to improve TSA PreCheck, streamline the acquisition of new technology, expand TSA's capabilities to counter drones. So there's a lot of different priorities under this big Horizon 25 strategy. The big news is that Gold Plus, at least, is no longer going to be a term that TSA and a concept that TSA moves forward with.
So how far did the Gold Plus program really get before TSA decided to pull the plug on it?
Well, 3 airports had announced plans to adopt Gold Plus earlier this summer. Those 3 airports were Tampa International Airport, Des Moines International Airport, and Charleston International Airport. So a pretty big one in Tampa, 2 smaller ones in Charleston and Des Moines, but significant that they had opted into this concept. And Gold Plus as a concept was, kind of moving beyond SPP by not just having private companies provide the people, the screeners, but also have those private companies be involved in managing the technology that the screeners use to screen air travelers for banned items and things like that. And so this was kind of a step beyond. It was aimed at innovation, and those 3 airports had expressed an interest in moving forward with it publicly. But actually, in line with TSA rolling out this new strategy that replaces Gold Plus, Tampa International Airport announced on Monday that after reviewing Gold Plus further, they were no longer going to move forward with it and instead stick with their federal airport screeners.
Did Tampa explain why they weren't going to go forward with it? Were there certain characteristics of it that proved problematic?
They didn't mention anything particularly problematic, but what they did say is that Tampa was able to do a more in-depth review about the Gold Plus program after opting in. Opting in allowed officials there to learn more about security, workforce, technology, financial, and legal considerations. And after conducting that evaluation, they decided to stick with the federal airport screeners. And so it's interesting that, after expressing some interest, they decided to take a deeper look and say, yeah, this isn't for us. And how that kind of aligned with TSA's own review of this program under David Cummins, who just was confirmed several weeks ago. We don't really know at this point, but Tampa at least decided that they would rather stick with the status quo.
Justin, what does all of this signal then for any future TSA privatization efforts?
Yeah, so it's a little muddy right now, but I spoke to both some former DHS officials and industry officials who were in the know on Gold Plus. And, they believe that Gold Plus ultimately didn't gain enough traction because it was a little bit unclear what exactly TSA was trying to improve upon. The program was kind of sold as an innovative program to streamline airport screening, but beyond that, TSA really didn't identify what that means. And airports were sold on it in large part because of the big DHS shutdown that happened over the past spring and the fact that privatized airport screening checkpoints fared better by and large through that shutdown because their employees continued to get paid, whereas the federal TSA screeners did not get paid, and you saw call-outs and a lot of big delays at airports. And so there was kind of a mismatch there, and interest in the whole innovation side didn't really come through, at least to this point. There was also a major contract for Gold Plus that was in the process of actually going through a down select when TSA announced plans to replace the program. They were planning to award that contract, a 10-year, potentially $13 billion contract, as early as September. And so it's unclear what's going to happen with that solicitation. There's certainly a lot of consternation among industry who spent many months preparing proposals for that procurement. So it's a little unclear what happens next. But TSA under this administration still wants to expand privatization through SPP. And what I heard is that this whole goal of upgrading screening technology, that's not going to go away either. And so perhaps under David Cummins' leadership, TSA will try to find a way to just pair the existing SPP program contracts with technology and technology vendors to go that route rather than trying to create a whole new program out of whole cloth.
That's Federal News Network's Justin Doubleday. Justin, thanks for keeping us up to date.
Thanks, Terry.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, September could bring answers on several issues federal employees have been tracking for months. Funding, pay, and health data privacy are all approaching important decision points. This is The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. This fall could bring clarity on several issues that affect federal employees and retirees directly, from government funding to next year's pay raise to the handling of FEHB claims data. John Hatton of NARF is here to walk us through what comes next. John, great to have you. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Here we sit at the end of summer. The next thing that pops up on many Feds' forecast is shutdown, end of September, the end of the fiscal year. We're making some progress there. Both of the congressional chambers have passed a version of the CR, but they haven't reconciled them yet. From NARF's perspective, what will you be watching for once they come back in September?
We'll be watching what the House does. So the Senate passed on a broadly bipartisan basis a continuing resolution that would extend current year funding levels to December 11th. Our hope is that the House basically just takes that up because you have that bipartisan agreement in the Senate, and you always need that because you have that 60-vote threshold in the Senate. Whether there will be controversy within the House, particularly either among House Republicans to put that on the floor, or unwillingness of House Democrats to then negotiate, to come together and provide votes for it if the Republicans aren't there. it creates a little bit of uncertainty of whether that CR is going to be passed in September and through December. Right now, I'd bet on it happening versus not happening. I don't think a lot of people want to shut down heading into an election, but it's been a rather chaotic environment in Congress and certainly partisan, and so you never really know, and there's a lot of different factions. So remains to be seen what the plan will be in September.
Are there particular differences between the two versions of the CR that you would be concerned about?
No, I mean there's the underlying basic extension of funds. There's anomalies that were not negotiated on a bipartisan basis in the House. Um, we generally we're probably not going to take a view on some of those more specific, government funding provisions one way or the other. I think the Senate, because it's got a very broad bipartisan support, is just much more likely to pass, and the House one isn't. And the House usually acts on a partisan basis first, has to go to the Senate. They have to work in that bipartisan basis because of the 60 vote threshold, and then you get closer to kind of a resolution. So I think it's just more about simplifying it and ensuring it is a passable piece of legislation.
There's some other discussion on the Hill about ways to prevent future shutdowns. And so from NARF's perspective, what are you hearing there, and what are some of the ideas worth paying attention to?
So there's a bill that's been introduced in both the House and the Senate called the Prevent Government Shutdowns Act. It's a Lankford and Hassan bill in the Senate that is, a leading Republican and a leading Democrat on the relevant committee. It's an Arrington-Panetta bill in the House. There are probably sufficient Democratic co-sponsors to potentially get support in the Senate if you have all the Republicans supporting it as well. Tough to tally up the exact numbers before it gets there and whether it gets to the floor. What that bill would do is if we reach the end of the fiscal year and no bill has been passed, there would be an automatic continuing resolution. It would then combine with that the requirement that the chambers stay in session, that the only business they can do is working on appropriations, limitation on congressional travel. So things like people taking CODELs in the middle of a shutdown, those are congressional delegations, and foreign trips, for example, would be prohibited. So we think it puts some teeth on it, so it's not just an automatic CR, and there's some reason for people to work it out. And so we've supported that. There was a hearing in the House by the House Appropriations Committee that looked at it, that brought over the Senate. So there's certainly a growing potential consensus around this. I think there's still opposition from appropriators, particularly Democratic appropriators, where they think that gives up some power or authority to the administration from and takes it away from Congress, because you have that backstop that this could just go on indefinitely. Understand their concerns. I think from the federal workforce concern, we've just seen way too many shutdowns, way too much disruption in government functioning, way too much risk put on the federal employee to either keep on working or be furloughed without pay for a really long time. And I think this is a better solution than what we've seen in reality.
John Hatton is Staff Vice President of the National Association of Active and Retired Federal Employees. Well, John, on that note, let's turn to pay. We're getting close to the deadline for the president's alternative pay plan. So what is NARF watching there? What are you hearing?
Well, in the budget request to Congress, there was a pay freeze. So barring a surprise, we would expect that alternative pay plan to communicate no increase in pay. At the same time, the NDAA that passed the House had a range of 5 to 7% pay increase for military. And so that's a really big disparity there, typically, particularly as you relate it to those working kind of side by side in various defense jobs, particularly stateside, or even for those who are abroad and civilian and in harm's way is all. I mean, you try to keep a degree of parity, and we've really gotten away from that over time, and this would be a huge departure from that pay parity principle. So there seems to be some support on that. That would likely need to go through the appropriations process in terms of a pay raise. So I would still hold out hope that there will be some pay increase provided through Congress and through the appropriations process, even if the president's proposal is zero. If Congress says nothing, that pay freeze will go into effect, but there is certainly a role for Congress in the government funding process to provide something higher.
We'll have to certainly watch how that plays out. And one more topic. You and I have talked in the past about OPM's plan to collect federal employee health benefits and PSHB claims data. OPM has made some changes since the first proposal came out, and NARF recently commented there. Did they address any of your concerns? What's still on the table?
They have in some ways addressed some of our concerns, but we still had serious concerns that we communicated via our official comments. And so they explained a lot more why they wanted the data, but some of those explanations came in a blog post from the OPM director and not all in the official documents. So we had some concerns there. It's to take that data in OPM's roles of an oversight agency, mainly to root out potential cases of fraud, to analyze data to help drive improve policy decisions and improve health outcomes and reduce costs. So that all makes sense as an idea of what they want to do. But there's reasons that generally employers don't have access to medical claims data of their employees, and we remain particularly concerned about that. And there's not, in our view, enough limitations on their ability to protect that data from being switched from de-identified, from what they're proposing is pseudonymized data. So you take OPM would not have an ID that would track to a person, but it could be tracked later through a re-identification process. So there's not enough limits on that re-identification process. There's too many exceptions on their ability to get access to who people are, and then it's within OPM's own control to make those decisions. And the concern is that HIPAA provides specific reasons to protect employees from their employer having access to their health data so they will not be retaliated against. It could be because certain people have higher healthcare costs and you want to reduce costs for the government. We don't want employers in the private sector or employers in the public sector to have that type of data. Particularly when you talk about politics, there's the concern that you could take personal health decisions and use as a repercussion against individuals. And they don't say explicitly that they're not going to use it for those purposes. So we would like to see them clean it up in a lot of different ways to protect individuals' privacy, to protect their data from security, from retaliation, and go from there.
John Hatton is Staff Vice President at the National Association of Active and Retired Federal Employees. John, always appreciate your headlining the issues for us. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Hear the Federal Drive on demand. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, commercial aviation depends on a growing network of connected systems. GAO found gaps in how federal agencies oversee the cybersecurity risks that come with them. But first, a court can tell an agency it was wrong. Getting employees the remedy they want can take much longer, and a decade-old Secret Service overtime case shows why. You're listening to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. A court ruling has given new momentum to a long-running dispute over Secret Service overtime pay. The case began with questions about agency pay practices. Today, it raises a broader question: how federal employees actually obtain a remedy after an agency's actions have been found unlawful. Joining me with more on this case and its settlement is Nicholas Wazorek of Clark Hill. Mr. Wazorek, thank you so much for joining me today.
Carrie, thanks for having me.
There's a recent Court of Federal Claims case regarding the U.S. Secret Service. Why is this such an important moment in that case?
Well, to give it some perspective, we have to go back 10 years. So in 2016, the law firm I was working for at the time was contacted by a Secret Service agent who felt he was being improperly paid under federal law. We investigated that and determined that his concerns had merit, so we filed a lawsuit in the United States Court of Federal Claims where money actions against the federal government are handled, alleging various improper pay practices, one of which was unpaid overtime due to special agents in the Secret Service for work they had performed. So that was the genesis of the lawsuit. It traveled its way up to the United States Court of Appeal for the Federal Circuit in 2018. And in that case, the circuit court said that one of the pay practices the agency had, which we can discuss, was illegal. And the rest of the case since then has been about trying to get these agents paid for overtime they worked that they were not paid for.
And what was the decision then recently in the Court of Federal Claims that moves this case to the next step?
So after the pay regulation was struck down by the Court of Appeal in 2018, the case continued. So the agency did not want to settle the case. They wanted to litigate the case, and that continued for another 7 years. In 2024, the current judge on the case issued an order denying the Secret Service's motion essentially to dismiss the case, a motion for summary judgment, finding there were valid actions that should go to trial. One of the judge's other orders was that the agency had improperly destroyed pay records, timesheets, and other records that could be used to help establish how much overtime the agents in the case were entitled to. That, I think, led the agency to perhaps reconsider its position. And last year, the court ordered the case into a mediation posture where we have now tentatively struck a settlement deal, again, 10 years after the issue first arose.
Secret Service overtime is a perpetual problem. They are understaffed, overworked, and anybody who watches what happens with the Secret Service workforce knows that those agents pull a lot of overtime. Have the policies changed so that they are at least recording pay properly today?
So, like any other federal agency, the regulations are sometimes complicated and can lead to differing results. Secret Service agents are identified under federal law as special investigators, criminal investigators. And under the federal statutes, they are entitled to what's called a 25% pay enhancement of their base pay. It's called Law Enforcement Availability Pay. Shorthand for it is LEAP. And that basically allows them to work an additional 2 hours every day of unscheduled duty, meaning things come up, they have to stay late, they have to go to a different site, they have to handle something that was not anticipated. The Secret Service has, since LEAP was applied to agent pay, scheduled their overtime under LEAP. So most agents now have 10-hour workday schedules. In addition to that, if an agent works additional unscheduled duty, they should be getting paid overtime. And the issue in the case was the regulation called for any unscheduled duty hours to have been worked consecutively, like 2 or more consecutive hours between, for example, 7 and 9 p.m., whereas many agents would come in at 7 a.m. and work till 8 a.m. and then stay late and work from 7 p.m. till 8 p.m., and they were not getting paid for that. So the issue in the case was, how do we pay these agents now that the court has said that consecutive hours requirement is no good? The agency still has their employees record their time, but the issues now are a little clearer because the court's rulings in this case and others.
Nicholas Wazorek is a member at Clark Hill. One thing that stands out about this case is how long it has taken to get even this far. What does this tell you about the difference between winning a legal ruling and actually getting the remedy?
So the legal side of a case is just part of it. The other is the party's position in the case. What I've observed over the last 10 years of dealing with the Secret Service as an agency is that it takes a very aggressive position on its litigation and aggressive position on its policies. I had believed in 2018, when that Court of Appeal spoke on the case, that it would be a matter of quick negotiation, settlement, and payment. But the agency didn't believe that and continued to litigate the case for a long time. I think part of that is a reflection of just agency culture. I think part of it is a reflection of agency attitude toward its workforce. And as we've seen in recent news events and the 2024 campaign for president, the Secret Service has issues one of which is morale of the workforce, which we don't believe is especially good.
Federal employees really across the government are watching a number of disputes play out right now involving terminations, bargaining obligations, and other workforce actions from the administration over the last 18 months or so. Are there broader lessons that folks should learn from this case about what happens after a court or an administrative body maybe determines that the government got something wrong?
Well, I think any lawsuit involving the federal government, you have to be prepared for a long haul. So there are forces in play in the government. There are agency positions and people whose job it is to mind these types of things. And it just takes a long time to get a case set up in a position to work a resolution. In this particular case, after 7 or 8 years, we were able to posture it for resolution. And now our challenge is trying to communicate the fact of this settlement to the members of the workforce who are entitled to the settlement that has been tentatively agreed to. So there are over 5,000 current and former Secret Service agents who are entitled to share in this settlement. We're dealing with a time period between 2015 to 2018, and many people move and change addresses. The agency has sent out notice to the last known addresses of all of these agents. Over 500 letters have come back. So we need to figure out the next 30 to 60 days how to spread the word about this case among those who are entitled to share in it, and hopefully give them the ability to choose to participate.
And if one of those people might be listening right now and hasn't heard otherwise, where can they reach out for more information?
Absolutely. So our law firm has set up a email that you can access or send an inquiry to. We're happy to respond to it. USSSlawsuit@clarkhill.com. There we can field your inquiry. We can ensure that you're qualified. We can walk you through the registration process, which is challenging and difficult in its own way because we're dealing with a settlement website created by the Secret Service. So there's security involved with it. But our goal is to make sure that all 5,000 plus eligible employees are certainly entitled to share in the proceeds of a overtime settlement that they earned.
It sounds like just reaching the people who are involved potentially in a case is one of the biggest challenges. But when you look across the federal workforce landscape, are there other major obstacles that make it difficult to translate these legal victories into practical outcomes for the affected employees?
Well, so in this case, as in the case of other litigation we're involved in involving other federal law enforcement officers, many of the identity of these individuals is considered sensitive information. So we cannot get our hands on a mailing list, an email list for all employees in a given agency to share information or communicate or inquire as to whether improprieties are going on. So it is very kind of happenstance that we get contacted from time to time by a federal employee who says something's not going right in my agency. Once a case is set up as a class action, then you have full access to your class members. But between the filing and the class certification date, it is sometimes extremely difficult to communicate the fact that there's even a lawsuit going on involving the workforce of a particular agency that people may be interested in.
Nicholas Wazorek is a member at Clark Hill. Thank you so much for joining me and bringing this particular case to our attention.
I sincerely appreciate the time today. Thank you for having me again.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, commercial aviation depends on a growing network of connected systems. GAO found gaps in how federal agencies oversee the cybersecurity risks that come with them. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. From airport networks to systems embedded in aircraft, commercial aviation relies on an increasingly complex digital infrastructure. A new GAO review found shortcomings in how FAA and TSA coordinate responsibility for protecting that environment from cyber threats. Jennifer Franks, director of GAO's Center for Enhanced Cybersecurity, joins me now with the details. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really glad to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
You have dug into aviation cybersecurity. That depends on a growing network of connected systems on the ground, in the aircraft, across federal departments. Was there anything that prompted this particular look?
Yeah, absolutely. So what prompted this mandate was the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024. And that act included a provision for GAO to go in and evaluate both the Federal Aviation Administration as well as the Transportation Security Administration's roles and responsibilities managing cybersecurity and specifically aviation cybersecurity.
The FAA and the TSA are supposed to work together here. As you began the examination, what did you find both about their respective roles and how well they actually are working together?
That's a very good question. So we found out that there are some deviances with how they are actually working and collaborating in this cybersecurity space. FAA has defined and clearly assigned roles and responsibilities for carrying out the agency's related goals and objectives in this space. But in the contrast, TSA has not. And with the lack of really defining and clarifying your roles and responsibilities, what it is we found as that we started to interview stakeholders from industry, including airlines and other industry related groups, they were confused as well with TSA's role and responsibility and some of the guidance that was coming out. So helping to streamline that information was something that we were talking with the stakeholders very early on that could have been helpful for them in their environment.
Really interesting that you brought the industry into this conversation. If there's confusion out there between the TSA, the FAA, and the airlines themselves, what sort of risks does that pose for airline operations?
Lots of risk can be posed, not understanding the intended purpose of the functionality of a system, the interconnected agreements with the system. If you think about this aviation security and responsibly what TSA does, generally you're thinking about ground transportation and what's happening in the airports. But once a passenger gets on that airplane, and their airplane is set to back up from the gate and start to navigate its way through the concourse and to get into the air, there are a lot of interconnected systems and processes from what TSA is managing to what FAA is managing. And some of those very appropriate level of security systems and controls could have identified risk or maybe unidentified risk and threats to them if we're not properly assigning the roles and responsibilities and addressing those different security measures that need to be addressed.
The report identifies a number of findings around agency roles, as we've just been discussing, but also budgeting and strategy. Walk us through the findings and what might have been at the top of the priority list here.
Yes. So with the findings, first with our objectives, I will start there. Our objectives were really to hone in on the extent of their roles and responsibilities. But then the Authorization Act asked us to look at the budget request for the FAA and to just understand how they were managing cybersecurity funds. And from there, to the extent to where they were following their own cybersecurity related strategies to implement some of those roles and responsibilities and the implementation efforts and the continuous monitoring and just being better prepared for the adverse reactions should something occur. And what it is we were finding is a budget conversation in cybersecurity is very critical these days. You have to understand the ask and then what was appropriated and then how that money is spent. And what it is we were finding is from fiscal years 24 to 2026, FAA had requested between $42 million and $11 billion just on the management of cybersecurity and aviation controls. But what it is we were finding is that how they were managing the funds or just being a little bit less clear and transparent in the research and development areas was a bit of a concern. So we do have a recommendation for them to improve their transparency, rather, around the budget, because to understand how you're managing your information, how you're managing the tools and the services and the technology from an inception to a continual maintenance phase is critically important, because every year with cybersecurity, your budget does inflate with the variances of threats and risk that you have to assess. But we have to understand the what was and the what is so that we can estimate if you are appropriately aligning the resources as they should be.
Jennifer Franks is the director of GAO's Center for Enhanced Cybersecurity. Jennifer, one of the other things you call out is the FAA's implementation and monitoring of its cybersecurity strategy. Where does that come into play here as you're assessing risks and reliability?
So that's a good question. So what it is we were finding was FAA had not fully implemented some of the objectives supporting its cybersecurity strategy and looking at the goals to really protect and defend its networks and systems. And what's inherently important is you can have a procedure or some guidance and guardrails in place to navigate the what is, but unless you fully implement all of the necessary controls, you're going to have gaps in your processing. So there were 7 objectives that FAA did outline that they needed to have support for in their cybersecurity efforts. But our assessment revealed that only 3 of the 7 were actually adhered to. And the 3 that were really adhered to were their efforts to improve cyber threat intelligence collection and the processing of capabilities. We're looking at improving capabilities for detection and mitigation of threats, which are very important because we want to be able to discern what's coming and how to protect, and then leveraging cybersecurity research and development. But what we found, which is where we end up having some recommendations, are we have to improve our cybersecurity monitoring and our detection and our response capabilities. We have to look at our privileged user controls, those access controls of who can access these systems and how often, and are they actually performing the services that they need to be performing when. So getting into more of those zero trust architecture principles that really help us to refine some of the security controls that are needed to enhance the environment was really critical. In that area, we made a recommendation.
You've been talking primarily about findings here with the FAA. Did TSA just ace the test, or were there some issues that you found with them as well?
Definitely did not ace the test, and they do have one recommendation. And it really does stem from working with the stakeholders and understanding more of how cybersecurity is managed between TSA and FAA. So their recommendation was just one. It was primarily centered around that cybersecurity roadmap, where they really need to clearly define their roles and responsibilities for the entities that are responsible for carrying out aviation cybersecurity, and then really looking to share that information with the pertinent stakeholders so that they know the responsibilities that TSA does provide.
Jennifer, of those 5 recommendations, the agencies agreed with all of them, which doesn't always happen on a GSA report. But with that kind of alignment, what do you hope then that Congress takes from this in terms of policy direction and guidance? Because again, you're dealing with really important agencies, but they do cross departments, and that makes this collaboration even more complicated.
It's very complicated. And one of the shining spots right now is that no threat has happened that mounted itself into a major event, a major cyber threat that impacted air traffic control or even ground transportation that bridges that collaboration between TSA and FAA. But we have to stay ready to get ready. We don't know when, if, and how that vulnerability can occur. And if you're looking at some of our recommendations and thinking about what Congress can do next, because this was a part of an authorization act, so this legislation came from Congress, we have to stay on the cutting edge of making sure that they implement these recommendations. And yes, we went in and did a subset review of some of the systems in these areas, but holistically in their environment for managing and navigating all of the aircraft that is traveling across the globe, we need to be responsible for making sure that the configuration baseline of their agency is implementing these recommendations throughout, so that if something occurs, we have the utmost sophisticated controls in place to perhaps prevent something catastrophically from occurring.
Jennifer Franks is the director of the GAO Center for Enhanced Cybersecurity. Jennifer, thanks so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate you for having me.
We'll post this interview and a link to the report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Add the employees of the Agriculture Department's Foreign Agriculture Service to the growing list of federal workers who have successfully challenged the Trump administration's return-to-work policies. A third-party arbitrator on Monday sustained the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees' grievance that USDA violated the collective bargaining agreement and the Telework Enhancements Act when ending telework without negotiations. With more on this latest case and what the growing list of losses means for the administration, Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller, joins me now. Jason, thanks for being here.
Always a pleasure, Terry.
What did the arbitrator rule in this latest grievance that AFS-CME filed on behalf of its members on the Foreign Agriculture Service?
This is the second in about a week that the Agriculture Department lost before a third-party arbiter. And in this one, Barbara Denhart sustained the AFS-CME, say that fast 3 times, grievance because they said, well, we had employees who had in their collective bargaining agreements as part of the union contract the ability to telework. And to change that decision, it has to go through negotiations. And what we saw time and again is this administration just did kind of a blanket, no more telework, it's over, despite the fact the union and the agency had agreed through their contract to negotiate over telework. It didn't stop there either. They also violated the Telework Enhancement Act because of eligibility issues, which basically said if you're eligible to telework, you should have that opportunity. Now, the agency can obviously decide whether or not you do or don't, but you should be able to talk about it and have that. You can't just blanketly say nobody is allowed to telework. And interesting enough, I think the third piece here is, again, they violated the collective bargaining agreement on another section of it where they talk about that basically you need to grant case-by-case basis on who can telework and when. The fact is that the arbiter said the restrictive language in the collective bargaining agreement applied just as it applied to other places, whether it's HUD or EPA. So again, she's finding a lot of the same things that other arbiters have found when it comes to this return to office policy.
Well, to that point, how does this decision compare with the decision that Rural Development Agency employees won before a different arbitrator last week?
This was interesting, too. About 135 employees, again, filed the grievance through AFSCME. And this time, the arbiter, Margaret Donahue, found, again, very similar. Number one, the agency committed unfair labor practices. It engaged in bad faith bargaining, implemented conflicted that conflicted with the existing agreement, which is, again, saying no more telework, you can't do it anymore, and no negotiations around that. Now, interestingly enough, this also had very similar themes from the Foreign Agriculture Service. Again, this idea of in the agreement, we've agreed, the agency and the union, that this is something that we can do collective bargaining over, and time and again, they just have pushed it to the side. And I think part of the concern here is that the telework agreements, agency after agency after agency, arbiters continue to find that the administration has just thrown it out the door, not paid attention to it, and has ignored it. And I think that's what's most interesting about this case, this new one, and then last week's as well.
As you string these USDA cases together with, as you said, agency after agency, there's a string of mounting losses for the Trump administration. How do you tie all of those together? What is the connective tissue?
According to Suzanne Summerlin, who's a lawyer for the unions, in this case, both Agriculture Department cases that we've been talking about, she says, by her count, this is about the 18th of the 20 cases, the grievances brought before arbitrators that the administration has lost. And when you talk about who they've lost, it's not one agency like Agriculture Department over and over again. It's agency after agency after agency, whether it's the FAA, it's a very small one, case there, or everyone that includes EPA, HUD, SSA, IRS, we can go on and on and on to the number of cases. What stood out to her is the arbitrator basically said the agency just burned the contract. They didn't even try to address it. They didn't even try to pretend to negotiate. They just, what she calls repudiation, which is just, they just tore it up, threw it out, and said enough. And I think that's not just one arbiter saying this. This is many arbiters saying it, and then building on each other's decisions time and again, where it's not a single person or single arbiter saying this was a bad case. It's again and again and again. And I think to Suzanne Summerlin, this is just an example of just how bad it has been around the decisions to return to the office, how much this has affected every agency so far, 20 in all. And I think she's just idea that this is the most egregious, bad policy that the administration has pushed forward.
These decisions by the arbitrators sound good for employees, but it's not the end of the resolution. These cases are far from over. What happens next?
That's so true, and I think it's a minor win for the employees. Yes, it's a step in the right direction, but again, Suzanne Summerlin talks about, well, the agency, in this case USDA, in both cases we've been talking about, has 30 days to file an exception with the Federal Labor Relations Board, and that comes after the arbitrator's ruling. And these cases could still end up in federal court. It could go on for several more years, she said. And the irony about this is if the administration would have gone to the union at the very beginning and said, listen, we're not fans of telework. We want the return to office to happen. We're going to negotiate this. Gone to if they basically hit an impasse, it could go to an impasse panel. This all would have been settled by now. Yes, it would not have had the effect that maybe the administration wanted of getting the employees back in the office as soon as possible. But instead, there's this prolonged effort it could go through courts, through arbitration panels, and it's going to just cause people money, time, frustration, morale. All these things, I think, to her point, she says, could have been avoided. And by now, here we are, 18 months later, a lot of it probably would have been decided with some folks having already come back to the office and the administration hitting many of their goals, which is to bring people back together. They believe they work better together. They believe we have all this office space that the government pays for. We should be using it. Obviously, the COVID pandemic has been over now for several years. There's no reason why you shouldn't be back in the office. Now, there's plenty of employees who disagree with that. There's plenty of people who say could explain why they don't want to be in the office. But that's part of collective bargaining, which the government agreed to, and by, again, just tearing the contract up and lighting it on fire and giving it up, again, Suzanne Summerlin says that this all could have been avoided. Instead, we have bad policy, and here we are going before arbiters and courts and the like.
That's Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller. Jason, thanks for keeping us posted on this.
My pleasure.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editor is Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.